this is kind of the second half of the tale that began with the golden calf being made. And we know what effect that had on what was going on with the people and their relationship with God. Again, we have talked about this before, but it's worth mentioning again, and that is, remember, all these people, these hundreds of thousands of people, were in slavery and they were set free by God. And so as we go through some of these historical accounts, we need to remember that right there, as we look at these people as a whole, there's a dramatic series of events that are going on. And the adjustment to being out where they are had to be incredible in and of itself. And I think we also understand the importance of the laws that were given to them to create the orderliness that that God would want in order to keep them whole and to keep them alive. And so we now get to the section beginning there in chapter 33 where we see more of this interaction between God and these people. Now, there's a couple of unusual things that get mentioned here. In other words, I call them unusual because it seems to me as these projected thoughts that I have of who God is and how he's supposed to behave and how he's supposed to react, it doesn't always work out that way. And there's a couple of examples here with that, and we'll get to those as we move ahead in this study. So in chapter 33, we move with the idea of what we might call what's become sort of popular today, and that is this idea of a reset. This is a reset here. And maybe not the way it's meant today, but at the same time, I mean, what happened when Moses went up the mountain and he found these people grossly disobeying God and worshiping an idol? There was a need for a turnaround of some kind, and this seems to me to be what's happening here. It's important to remember what happened when Moses came down the mountain. What almost shocking thing did he do? He broke the tablets. And again, that right there, I just have a hard time understanding that. I mean, it's just rocks. I understand that. But who wrote on the rocks? God wrote on the rocks. And, I just have to believe when I'm reading that this relationship that Moses has with God and his understanding, the understanding they have of one another, allows him to do something that, maybe you wouldn't have thought of doing or I wouldn't have done. But nevertheless, he did it. But they're important. Where do they end up being that signifies their importance? They ended up being in the Ark of the Covenant. And so it obviously was important to God that they be in there. And so he's going to make sure that works. Now, question number one, I say, do your best to explain God's words in 33 and 3. We'll go ahead and I'll read from 1 to 33. And then, of course, I ask you to evaluate the way the people reacted to that. And that's what you'll find in verse 4 down through 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham." So it's like we've kind of in some ways put the past to rest. It's time to move forward. He says, to the land of Egypt, to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. So why does that sound like a reset going back to what they were really supposed to be doing? When you mention Abraham and what was promised, wasn't that what this was all about from the beginning? All right, so we're back on track, I guess might be a way of looking at it. He says, and to your descendants I will give it. I will send my angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, and the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. That's going to be, those individuals who are going to be there that are going to be idolatrous worshipers. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. All right, so I'm asking you to explain here what God decides to do. And maybe you can, and maybe I can't either. I don't really know that there's any perfect explanation, because again, when something seems a little bit unusual, how do I have the right to try to explain it and expect that you would say, hey, that's the way it is, because I'm not sure that I feel that way about it. But, okay, so what was it that God said to them that sort of strikes you here as, maybe unusual, or at least an expression of his great authority? This is when I should see like 50 hands go up. Go ahead, Ian. Right.
He says immediately, you're going to go. But he also has to show his holiness and his expectations. I am a holy God. I can't be with you in the same way that I was with you or attempted to be with you in the past. You've shown me that you're not worthy of it, and you weren't willing to abide by what I said the first time. So now I'm going to create a new way for you to interact with me. Now, I might be jumping ahead of the content,
Yep.
but that's where Moses' role becomes much more important. He becomes an intercessor for the people.
Okay.
In this way that he can access a special revelation from God.
Right. Okay, anyone else? I like the word that Ian used. He talked about the reason why God maybe did this was holiness, his holiness. And of course, what does he say he won't do? He says, I'm not going to be with you people, but I'm going to make sure you get led. Any other ideas about that? Other than what Ian said, which was a great answer, but I'm just kind of curious. Anybody else? You had your hand up, Micah, so is it still up? You're kind of giving me one of these. So.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, it's almost like this test, because he did this earlier with Moses.
Yeah.
On saying like, okay, how are you going to respond to this?
Yeah.
So now he's giving them a review. It's also almost like he was reviewing a contract, saying like, okay, these are the promises I made for you.
Right.
But we're gonna have to make some adjustments, because if you just had this incident with the golden calf, another concern could be like, well, I don't want any of that to happen again. So let me see how well you're gonna listen.
Okay. All right, that's good. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Janine.
He's reminding them that the sin separates.
Okay, that's certainly a part. I mean, it's not that he's totally gone, but I think you're right there. And he says, this is where we have to sort of deal with the character of God a little bit here. He says, I don't want to be there. Why? Because I might do what? Destroy you. Again, and see that right there, I mean, obviously he had the power to do it. And I thought Ian put it in a good way, and I think a little more positive way. I mean, the reality, and don't let me put words in your mouth, Ian. So just the reality here is that God doesn't want to be in their presence because how the anger has been so great. And of course, that did happen before, in not exactly the same way. But God says, I just don't want to be with you people right now. And so he says, I'm going to give you an angel. Now, again, angels are so fun. I mean, people just love talking about angels and what they mean. And when, I mean, they're called the angel of God, we're pretty straight on that. We understand that that's a special angel that God has. It seems to be the number one angelic representative of God. This one isn't called the angel of God. Now, to show you how this kind of works in terms of people trying to determine, well, who's this angel anyway? Doesn't give his name, does it? But he's going to be the substitute, I guess. Is that a legitimate way of describing this? And because God has promised he's going to do what? make sure they get to the land of Canaan. All right, now, so let's go to chapter 23 of Exodus. Don't lose track of where we are. Verse 20 to 23. And something is said here that causes some scholars to say, we know who this is. All right, go ahead. Vance, read it, please.
Behold, I am going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, but he will not pardon your transgression, since my name is in him. But if you will truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them.
Okay, now, what do you think there is in this particular set of passages here that cause people to draw certain conclusions about who this angel is? I can't hear you, Edwina. Okay, I mean, he's obviously going to act in that way. I think that's a good point. The words here, when he says, for my name is in him. Okay, that's caused one person to say, and again, there are people who really like this idea of Christ making visits during the time of Moses and the wanderings. And so, because it says, and my name is in him, this particular scholar says that must mean that this is a, as he calls it, Christological appearance, an angelic appearance, because, well, why would he say he has his name in him? Now, I'm just asking you, would you have to conclude that about that? Would you have to conclude that that's what this is talking about? I mean, does God have his name in you? I think we would all agree that, that we wear his name. So what I'm getting at is that he's an angel, obviously of grand skills. There's no question about that. But to, in this particular case, refer to an angel as having no name, and then you get over here to Exodus, and again, this is an angel that has no name or no particular identification. And again, these are unusual things for us. The whole idea of angels. I mean, you know how we've, over the last 20 or 30 years, we've had, I don't know, that I can think of 4 or 5 TV shows that center around angels. We love it. We love it. And I guess because it's something we sort of deal with mythologically and in a sort of fictitious sort of way, and we deal with what these angels must be like. And we draw conclusions. And I think some people, if you ask them, well, what's an angel like? They're probably going to tell you what they saw in the TV show. Because you don't really know a whole lot about them from the Scripture. Other than, when you look at what we're reading here in the book of Exodus, is that they act as what? Messengers, or, well, that's what a messenger, an angel is. But what are these guys specifically doing? They're guardians, and they're going to be the leaders for God, and kind of like Moses has been in a similar thing. But nevertheless, that's the situation that we have here. Now, okay, so he says, I'm not going to go. Anybody have any other conclusions as to why God said he wouldn't do that? Anybody else? Ian had really good answers. Anybody have another answer for that? Okay. I guess there is not one that exists. So, now what I want to ask you to do is, I want you to react and tell me about how the people react. Because this is interesting too. Yeah, when it says they feel really bad, they feel down about it, they feel lousy about it. He says, and when the people heard this bad news, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. And I ask you to define that. There's a little bit of historical background here, and it helps with the answer. I mean, generally, they associated the things that they put, like I guess earrings and such things as that, were things that you put on when you were experiencing joy. And so this is not a time of joy. So they take them off. Now, again, I think I understand why Moses says this is not a good thing, for you to not go in there with us and use the angel to lead us. But nevertheless, they're very, very sad about this. And it says, "For the Lord had said to Moses, say to the children, you are a stiff-necked people." Now, you talk about, okay, let's get real positive here, and maybe that'll make them feel better. What does he say? Well, let me tell you why. You're a bunch of stiff-necked people. So I think that shows a certain level of irritation that God has with them. It says, "For the Lord said to Moses, say to the children of Israel, you're a stiff-necked people. I could come up into your midst in one moment and consume you." That's how I'm feeling right now. So again, this is a very alive sort of issue, and something about God that really comes out in this particular account. And even though I might look at this and think this is one of these situations where God could, if he's really God, then God can keep his cool a little bit better. But then that's me. You see, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at it from a physical perspective, and the point is that God is angry. Go ahead, Mitch. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's almost like saying, he says, if I get there with you, am I wrong in sort of inferring from this? And if I get there with you and you start acting up again, then I may destroy you. Now, of course, what's working here that seems to be that we look at that and we think that, not that he doesn't mean it, but he wants them to understand how significant it is, because he is angry, he is upset in a righteous sort of way. But he did make the promise, and he's going to keep the promise. And what is the promise? I'm going to get you to the land. So the people ought to know that, but they're very angry. So it says, "Take off your ornaments that I may know what to do to you." So the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by Mount Horeb. So then Moses took his tent and pitched it outside the camp. Okay, so in question number 3, what did the people regularly do when Moses, at least that's the way it's presented, when Moses went out to the temple, to the tent, the tabernacle? What did the people normally do? Go ahead, Janine.
They watched him, but they worshipped at their own door.
Yeah, they stayed there. And I guess, why do you think it would stand up outside and do that? Doesn't it really explain why? Any ideas or thoughts about it? How would you think it would look here, in our town if we all, when, the mayor walked in to the city building and we all stepped outside and watched her go in? We almost kind of laugh at that. Okay, go ahead, Cindy.
There were so many of them, they can't congregate.
Yeah.
There's millions. So the simplest thing to do is just stand in front of your homestead.
Right. So, and I'm assuming that they were positioned in such a way to where they could see Moses move, and that right there must have been a plan of plans here, getting it organized that way. But nevertheless, we don't need to worry about that. But that's what they did. So why would they do it? Why do you think they would do it? Doesn't say why that I can see. Okay, go ahead, Vance. Thanks for stepping out there, man.
Sense of reverence that comes with, you're doing something, you're going about your day, and you see Moses, you stop everything you're doing.
Right.
Outside, you immediately worship.
Okay, Moses is an important individual in their lives, and certainly the tabernacle is. Okay, it was there where Moses met God, and so I think it's quite possible that what's happening here is there's a great amount of respect that's being given. And anybody else? Go ahead, Susan.
Well, Moses is one that speaks for God to them, so they may be like,
Yeah, okay. Is something going to happen, you know? Yeah. Okay. All right, good. All right. I find a lot of this stuff very, very interesting, even though we don't have a whole lot of answers for it. But something also happens, and that is Joshua, who normally is known at this time for doing what? Yeah, that wasn't what I was thinking of, but he seems to be second in command. And of course, what he's known for in this particular context is while Moses is up on the mountain, then he's halfway down. And we're not sure what he's doing, but that's where he is. Okay. And you can draw your own conclusions about what he may be doing. But I ask you that. Can you see any significance to Joshua remaining at the tabernacle, though, after Moses returns to his tent? See, that's kind of looking at it a little bit differently. He's been the one to be aware, at least, that Moses is still up there, and when he comes down, I guess he's going to communicate to the people. He's on his way. And then, in this particular setting, what is happening? He's now stays in the temple, or the tabernacle, when Moses leaves it. Any ideas or thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Jessica. Okay. So there's the loyalty that would be very important. What is he eventually going to do when Moses is out of the picture? He is going to become the leader that takes them where? Yeah, across the river into the land. And so maybe it's a way of sort of building up his significance, and that, he is connected to Moses. Moses is very connected to God. And so, therefore, when Moses is gone, who would be likely to be the one to take his place? Joshua. Go ahead, Bob. Well, yeah. He's certainly there as a part of it. I don't have any evidence that he did, but if he's being close to the situation, maybe somehow he's going to learn something. So it may be just for that reason. I kind of look at that a little bit more in terms of trying to understand his positioning in the group here, because how many years later is this all going to happen when he's going to take over? 40, because we're still early in the whole piece here, aren't we? So we still got almost the whole period of time, not completely 40. So anyone else on that? Okay, what we're doing is, a lot of times we say when we're studying the Old Testament, what's one of the differences between the Old and the New? I didn't talk about it this morning, but one of them is there's a kind of a real direct sort of thing going on between God and the people in the Old Testament, and it's not direct in the New. There certainly are some very direct things in the New, but there's nothing like this where we get such a powerful picture of God and his, going back to Ian's point, his holiness. And we certainly learn that, and that's one of the things when we learn from the law. Certainly we learn that the law didn't accomplish the forgiveness of sins, but we also learned about what? About people and about God related to sin. You mentioned it before, Janine, as part of one of our pictures. You were not directly, but when God decided he wasn't going to be there with them, why was that? Okay, because sin separates us from God. So that's certainly, I think, something that one learns when you see these exchanges, that that God is not happy with sin. And that's almost kind of stupid to put it that way, but that's the best I can do. So if you look now at question 5, this is when it gets a little bit more involved with Moses, because Moses now, he's got some concerns of his own. Because the angel's going to be the being that's going to be leading God. And God's the one who made the decision to do this. But Moses is going to offer his opinion in this one. All right, now let's go ahead and look at, well, what did I have there? Yeah, 12 and 13. Chapter 33, 12 and 13. Let's see. You want to read Micah 33, 12 and 13? Okay.
Then Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you yourself did not let me know whom you will send with me. Moreover, you have said, I have known you by name. You have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people."
Okay, so what's his point here? I mean, again, he's a bit perplexed. So what's his problem? Go ahead, Susan. Yeah, it's like I'm a little bit confused here, I guess would be the way I would put it. Because, his view is that God's going to be right in the middle of it all, and there's a reason for that. We'll look at that in just a second. And that seems to him that's not going to be happening that way. And so it's like, really, what's going on here? He says, I know you have said about me, Moses says, you have said about me, I know you by my name, and you have also found grace in my sight. Now, therefore, if I have found grace in your sight, show me now your way. Now, it's not like he's not been seeing God's way, but nevertheless, how is he reacting? I mean, come on, guys. Okay, how do you want me to do it? And here's the reason why I think I should be being told what I'm supposed to do. Go ahead, Kerry.
We kind of take for granted that we have the 39 books of the Old Testament. Moses had nothing.
Right.
Had no Genesis, had no accounts.
You couldn't look it up or anything like that.
Nothing to look at.
Yeah.
The only thing he's got written now, and they're brand new, are the tablets.
Uh-huh.
And so I can see how he would feel very much in the dark.
Yeah. Because he's not God, that's for sure. And so God seems to be doing something, and God can do things the way he wants to do them. But what Moses is thinking, we have this great relationship. And if we have such a great relationship, what should come from that, as far as Moses was concerned? Go ahead, Vance. Yeah, I mean, there ought to be a certain amount of closeness between us, because that's what you've said. He says, I know you by name. That's a pretty significant thing. I talk about this often, how significant it is when people are around you and they know that you know their names. It's a big deal to people. And even though, as I've said many, many times, it's hard to remember names. I mean, what if God would have said that to Moses? Well, I'm really sorry, but, I'm not very good with names. I mean, I know that's kind of silly, but, my point is, it was very important. And he says, it's not only something of which I was aware, it was something that you told me. And now it seems like things are getting sort of confusing. Now, we can draw the conclusion that this test idea that we used early on when there was going to be this destruction of the people, and Moses communicates with God, and God repents and decides not to do it. It may be that's all that's happening here, because there's something that's going to happen. And what does Moses need to keep believing? We're going to get to the land of Canaan. And, maybe I don't need to be filled in, Moses might think, with everything. But, I mean, it's a sense, I guess it's, I don't know, would anybody say this? Pride? I don't know. Any thoughts about that, Moses? I mean, people in these situations are very easy to pick on, as we've noted many, many times. Okay, so, yeah. At least I deserve to know what's going on here, I think, is what you're saying. Yeah, over here. Go ahead, Carol.
We have to remember that Moses was very reluctant from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Leader of this group of people. He didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And God assured him he would be with him, and he would help him
It seems. Yeah, that's right. That's the way he's looking at it. I think that's a really good point because he was extremely reluctant in the beginning. And, we kind of think, okay, we're in chapter 5 or 6 down the road, so things have changed now. Well, what causes things to not change? When, you're riding along in life, you're doing pretty well, what happens to upset you or me? When things happen that we don't expect to happen. Yeah, I think this is exactly what's happening to Moses. So, any other thoughts on that? Happy to listen to them. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe God is just telling him, like, giving this, reassuring him with this blessing, but it's almost like is Moses so focused just on himself and his relationship with God? Because I don't think that's really the case, though, because he says, consider this nation your people too.
Right.
Maybe he's saying, okay, I understand. These are a stubborn people, but they're still your people.
Okay, and read verse 14 while you're at it, because this was to assure Moses, I think. Go ahead.
It says, and he said, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest.
Okay, so if you go down and you say, then he said to him, this is, I guess, Moses talking back to God, if your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. All right, now how's he reacting? He's still not sure. Even though God says, my presence will be with you, then I'm not saying he's saying God didn't really commit enough for him, but he does say, I think, something very, very important. And when he says what he says about the presence of God, and what is it that he says? If your presence does not go with us, do not bring us up from here. What does he mean by that? Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks, Katie. We really can't do this without you. So you kind of understand the reluctant Moses, who's struggling with these difficult situations which come along. And God's just saying, look, I'm going to be with you. But Moses says, well, look, okay. But let's make it really easy to understand. If you're not going to lead us, we might as well not go. Sound reasonable? Okay. He says, for how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except you go with us? So we shall separate your people and I from all the people who are upon the face of the earth. Now, this is an issue for Moses, even way back in the days of the Egypt period and when they're on their way out. And what is it that Moses puts to God as he puts it here, if we understand what it means? What does he think is really important? If we are going to be viewed as special people to the world, what has to happen in his mind? Go ahead, Jim. God has got to be with us. That's right. That's exactly it. And if things go bad, now this isn't always true, but in his interpretation, if remember when God said, I'm going to destroy them all. And Moses more or less says, well, what are people going to think? That you brought these people out of Egypt and now you're going to destroy them? So it was important to God. So again, we're seeing, a side of God that helps us to understand that, he's not a robot, that he is a being with feelings, with a sense of understanding of what's obviously going on around him, and he feels what's going on. But he says, I'm going to be with you. And Moses says, look, if you're not with us, we might as well not even go, because it's going to be a big flop if you're not there. Okay? So, I ask you to compare and contrast the words found in 9:11 with those found particularly in verse 20. Now, this is another one of these kind of little games that we play here on this whole thing about what we know about God in the affirmative in the New Testament is that we can't see God. We would not be able to see God, I guess the implication is, and survive. Okay, so we've already seen that Moses, we didn't read it here, but it's here where Moses refers to this relationship he has with God. And he says, hey, we talk face to face. Okay, that doesn't have to be literal, does it? No, it's a phrase that that we would use, and what would we mean by it? I've been in His presence in the sense that we can, and we've communicated. It's not like I heard what He said from somebody else. I had this very special relationship with Him. All right, now, but in verse 20. It says, but He said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. Okay, now, remember now, let's just go ahead and look at what it was that Moses wanted. In verse 17, it says, the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. And He said, please show me your glory. All right, Moses seems to have a real desire for this. He understands what His glory is. He's seen it, I'm sure, in some form on the mountain. Maybe when you're looking at the cloud or the fire over the tabernacle or over the people, those would all be establishment, I think, of His glory. But it says, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But He said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. So that's an Old Testament truth stated, and in the New Testament as well. So here's what He does. He kind of wants to show a certain amount of movement here because He wants to support Moses. And again, going back to Carol's point, I think about this reluctance that Moses has in this situation. It kind of makes you wonder, well, why doesn't God get a little bit frustrated with him? I just said I'm going to be there with you, and now you want something else? That's what it seems like. And so that's what He does. So He says, here's what I'm going to do. The Lord said, here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be, while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock. So it shall be, while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Kind of gives you chills, doesn't it? I mean, just thinking about it. You can get the picture of this. I picture this big rock, and I picture sort of a crack down the middle of it, and it's big enough for Moses to fit in it, and God, with His hand, He covers it so he can't be hurt by it. But what does this show to you about God here at this point? I mean, there's so many lessons to learn. Yes, God hates sin. But what else do we learn about God? Go ahead, Larry. Yeah.
I think the whole passage all of this deals with something that we don't understand much, and that's honor.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of honor. Looking back in verse 15 and 16, when they get into that argument about, if you lead us, if you have a substitute lead us, we can't reflect your glory.
Right.
Because your glory's not there.
Right.
And that's a part of something that I think God wants us to know. I do have a problem with making God as human sometimes as we do.
Oh, I know, it's tough. Yeah.
Because He isn't.
No, He's not, but there are certain characteristics that at least we connect with on that level. Go ahead.
And so in this sense, Moses says, I want to see your glory. I want to share that honor. And Moses already has. That's why his face was all lit up
Yeah.
all that time and scared people.
Right.
And so in this case, he wants to see somehow God shows him that glory. And He's showing him that honor. He's sharing the honor with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring that to the New Testament. We have
Sure. And God doesn't need the glory we would offer to him.
Well, and that idea is reflect. That means there has to be a different light source than us. We're not the light source. God is. We reflect his
Right.
glory.
Okay.
We don't produce his glory.
Right. Okay. So I think that's certainly what Moses wants. I mean, he desires, this honor. I mean, he needs confidence, and God's willing to give it. So I would kind of go back to the point I was trying to make. Is also shows God's willingness to be understanding of people. Because I think from a human standpoint, Larry makes a good point, he's not us. God is not us. And so the way we look at Moses, or I just can only speak for myself, is that, I'm thinking there's got to be somebody else here who can do this. But that's not what God wanted. And so God was going to do what he was going to do, and Moses was going to be the one who was going to lead these people. And God gives him the support, if you will, the ability to see his glory and to see his back. Again, that sort of describes God in a way that sounds kind of human, but we just know whatever is the rear end of the vision of God in reality is described there, and that's what he's allowed to see. So he says, I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So, then the Lord said to Moses, cut 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, and I will write on these tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. So be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself to me there on the top of the mountain. And no man shall come up with you, and let no man be seen throughout all the mountain. Let neither flocks nor herds feed before that mountain. So he cut the 2 tablets of stone, and he's now in the process. He's going to go up, and God's going to write it again. Okay, so in question number 8, it says, if the Lord had already received the law, the people had already received the law and agreed to keep it, why do you think God made the tablets again? Yeah, that's good. That's a pretty good guess, I guess. I mean, certainly it was to remind them of the significance of those 10 particular laws. I don't know. Somebody say there were only 9 on there last week. I can't remember. But anyway, I mean, why would he have to? I guess, and he didn't have to, but he did do it. So Moses goes up, and that's exactly. Now, why do you think he may have done it? Given what follows in the rest of chapter 34. So Moses made haste in verse 8. It says, if I now have found grace in your sight, O Lord, this is verse 9, let my Lord, I pray, go among us, even though we are a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us as your inheritance. So it's like putting behind what event? The golden calf. We're going to put it behind us, okay? We're going to fix what Moses did or accomplished by breaking the tablets. And then if you look at verse 10, Kenny, would you read 10 and 11 of chapter 34, please?
And he said, behold, I make a covenant before all thy people. I will do marvelous, such as have not been done I shall do marvels, such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation, and all the people among which thou art shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do to thee. Observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before thee the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite.
Okay. I wasn't going to make you read those, Kenny, but You just sloshed right on through them. All right, so what does this sound like here? Again, making the connection between the fact that, okay, we're going to get new tablets. Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Renewal of the covenant between God and the people.
Sure, this is God's decision that that's what we're going to do. And he restates, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do amazing works amongst you. And but I'm going to see that you get the land, and I'm going to drive out these various nations ahead of us so you can go in. So that's how the whole thing was really established in the beginning, a couple of years before this. And so then if you'll look now in verse number 10, it says, in general terms, describe God's covenant found in 34:10 through 28. So if you're going to just kind of summarize what's there, what would you say? Well, what's the first part of it? The emphasis is on what very important thing that they want to make sure they've got out of their system before they get into the land. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be very important. And we know, we've talked about this before, that there were still some kind of hangers on. I mean, when you look at the golden calf, I think we understand, again, this was something that they had not completely shaken. I don't think they ever did, frankly. These people who did, for the most part, worship idols continued to do so around them, and they oftentimes got involved in it with them. But what he does is he says, okay, no graven images. That's pretty much what it says down through verse 17. And then he goes through what? So what does he start out with? Verse 18. The feast of the unleavened bread you shall keep. Okay, then he begins going down through the significant and major feasts that they are going to observe. And then, of course, we get another experience with the shining face of Moses. And maybe we'll look a little bit more at that next week. But, I mean, it's nice, when you look at Exodus and you look at Leviticus, it just seems like there's so much there about what the law was, the old law. But you can look at these verses, and it pretty much encapsulates what it is, even though there are other details that go with it. Okay? All right. We're already 3 minutes over, so I won't say I'll pay you back next week. I've heard people do that. It never seems to work. Certainly doesn't for me. Thanks for your patience. I appreciate it.